So, how do you draw a new line on a map? Well, it's not with a pen, that's for sure. It's with protests, with promises, and a struggle that can last for generations. And that's exactly what happened right in the heart of India. We're going to dive into the story of the 60-year fight for Telangana.
All right, so before there was an Andhra Pradesh, there was this, the old Hyderabad state. We're talking a massive territory, ruled by the Nizams. But, as India gained its independence, this map got completely redrawn. And its Telugu-speaking districts, the region we now know as Telangana, were suddenly set on a whole new path. A path that would, well, ignite a really powerful decades-long fight for its own identity.
So, what was this whole fight really about? Well, it pretty much boils down to three simple but powerful words: water, funds, and jobs. See, the people of Telangana just felt like they weren't getting a fair shake, their fair share of the state's resources. And that deep feeling of injustice, that's what would fuel this movement for decades to come.
Okay, so to really get a handle on this conflict, we've got to go back to the merger. In the 1950s, you had these three really distinct Telugu-speaking regions: Telangana, Coastal Andhra, and Rayalaseema. And they were all brought together to create this new state of Andhra Pradesh. But let's just say this wasn't exactly a match made in heaven.
And you can see just how deep these differences really were. I mean, geographically, you've got Telangana's dry plateau, which relied on rain, versus the super fertile river deltas of coastal Andhra. Historically, totally different stories. Telangana was shaped by the Nizam's rule, Urdu education, while coastal Andhra was under direct British rule, so they had way more access to English. We're not talking about small things here. These were fundamental, deep-seated differences in their economy, their culture, and, this is the big one, in opportunity. Now, the leaders at the time, they weren't blind to this. They could see the potential for problems down the road. So to try and calm the fears coming from the Telangana region, fears about being overshadowed by the more developed coastal Andhra, they came up with a kind of political solution. And it was called the Gentleman's Agreement. Honestly, you can think of it like a prenup, but for a state. It was a formal pact, a whole list of promises made directly to the people of Telangana, and the whole point was to guarantee that their resources, their jobs, and their culture would be safe and protected inside this new, bigger state of Andhra Pradesh. And look, these weren't just some vague, fuzzy promises. They were really specific safeguards. For example, any extra money made in Telangana had to be spent right there in Telangana. Local jobs, they were supposed to be protected by these special residency requirements called Mulki rules. There was even going to be a regional council just to oversee development. The really crucial thing to get here is that this agreement, it was the very foundation of the new state. The merger was conditional, right from the very beginning. So, what happens when those promises get broken? Well, just over a decade later, this feeling started to grow that the gentleman's agreement was basically being thrown out the window. And this led to the first massive, widespread protest for a separate Telangana state. And the main trigger, the spark that really lit the fire, was the violation of those Mulki rules. Remember those? The ones designed to protect local jobs? Well, people in Telangana started to see that government jobs, right in their own backyard, were going to people from coastal Andhra. And that wasn't just unfair. It violated both the spirit and the actual words of the agreement. And who was at the very forefront of this protest? It was the students, especially from Osmania University in Hyderabad. They were literally watching their future job opportunities just slip away. So they took what started as a protest over jobs and turned it into this incredibly powerful, really emotional movement demanding a whole separate state. And this was not a peaceful protest. The government's response was incredibly severe. According to the official records, 370 people lost their lives. Most of them were young students. That number, it's just staggering. It really shows you the tragic human cost, but also the incredible passion that was fueling this movement. So the 1969 agitation, it did eventually die down, but the core problems, they never went away. In fact, for the next 30 years or so, that feeling of neglect, of disparity, it just got stronger and stronger. And it was all fueled by cold, hard data that seemed to prove what they've been saying all along. And yeah, the data tells a really stark story. Check this out. Over 5 decades, the total amount of farmed land in the Andhra region grew by 20%. And in Telangana, just 5%. That one statistic right there, it just perfectly captures the huge gap in agricultural development. And here's why that matters so much. You have to look at where the water was coming from. In Telangana, the farmers were almost completely dependent on digging their own wells, which is super expensive. Meanwhile, in the Andhra region, they were benefiting from this massive government-funded canal system. So you've got one group relying on private debt and the other on public investment. See the difference? The consequence of that disparity was just devastating. Get this, in a single 1.5-year period, 63%, nearly two-thirds, of all farmer suicides in the entire state happened in the Telangana region. This wasn't just about economics anymore. This was quite literally about life and death.
And it wasn't just about water and money. There's this really deep sense of cultural humiliation, too. The way people in Telangana talked, their festivals, their very identity, it was often portrayed as backward or crude in popular culture, especially in movies. So you had this cultural insult just piled right on top of all the economic neglect.
So, by the early 2000s, all of this pent-up frustration just boiled over. It exploded into a new, totally revitalized movement. And this time around, it was a true people's movement. I mean, it involved every single part of society. And the ways they protested were just so creative. You had Dhumdum, which used traditional song and dance to get the message out. Then there was Vanta Varpu. Can you imagine this? Millions of people just cooking and eating together on the highways, completely bringing the state to a standstill. It was this beautiful and frankly incredibly powerful way to show just how unified they were. Okay, so you have all this energy on the streets, but it needed to be focused, and that's where new organizations came in. A political party, the TRS, was formed with one single goal: get statehood. And this is so important, these things called Joint Action Committees, or JACs, were created. They brought everybody together, students, lawyers, government employees, you name it, to coordinate these huge strikes and marches that basically paralyzed the government. Then the movement hit a critical point in November 2009. The leader of the TRS party, a man named KCR, began a fast unto death. Day after day, his health got worse. And as it did, the protests across Telangana just got more and more intense. Finally, after 10 incredibly dramatic days, the central government in Delhi caved. They announced that the process for creating Telangana state would finally begin. It really felt like victory. But then, just 2 weeks later, a complete, stunning reversal. Under huge pressure from political leaders in the Andhra region, the central government just took it back. They withdrew the announcement. Can you imagine? The celebrations turned instantly to shock and then to anger. The fight was far from over. You know, that feeling of betrayal, though, it actually just strengthened their resolve. It made them even more determined. The protests continued, but this time they were bigger and people were more dug in than ever before. For 4 more long years, the people of Telangana just kept up the pressure. And finally, after a struggle that lasted nearly 60 years, it happened. The Indian Parliament passed the bill, and on June 2, 2014, Telangana was officially born as the 29th state of India. A dream that had been held for generations was, at long last, a reality. You know, this whole 60-year fight for Telangana, it really shows us that maps aren't set in stone. They can be drawn and they can be redrawn by people who are just demanding to be seen and heard. It proves that a state is so much more than just lines on a piece of paper. It's this constant negotiation between identity, resources, and power. And that kind of leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? What truly makes a state?